My mom didn't shed a tear. She didn't slam down the receiver with a dramatic crash. She didn't even bother to ask for a single reason why I'd chosen such a path for my wedding. She simply said, her voice dripping with disdain, "A backyard. Really, Clara, that's hardly a real wedding, is it? That sounds more like a garden party for people who can't afford better." Then, with a click, she hung up, leaving a chasm of silence in her wake. That was the precise, heart-sinking moment I knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in my stomach, that she wouldn't be there. It wouldn't be because she was suddenly ill. It wouldn't be because the chosen date inconveniently clashed with some prior engagement. It wouldn't even be because of some unforeseen family emergency. No, she wouldn't come because my wedding, in her carefully curated worldview, simply wasn't an event worth gracing with her presence. It wasn't grand enough to meet her exacting standards. It wasn't ostentatious enough to warrant her attention. It didn't offer her the kind of stage she craved. I sat on our old wooden porch for what felt like an eternity after that call, the chill of the late autumn air seeping into my bones. The worn wood of the steps pressed uncomfortably into the backs of my thighs, a dull ache mirroring the one in my chest. The crisp November air, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and damp earth, cut straight through my thin sweatshirt, making me shiver. My fingers, numb and cold, clutched the phone so tightly it might shatter, as if it might miraculously ring again, as if she might call back. Her voice softened, to say it was all a terrible joke, or that she hadn't truly meant those cutting words. But the silence that followed was absolute, settling in around me, dense, heavy, and utterly immovable, like a shroud. Leo found me there eventually, emerging from the warm glow of the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea held carefully in his hands. He didn't need to ask what had transpired. My face, I'm sure, told him everything. He didn't utter a word, didn't probe. He simply handed me one of the mugs, its warmth a small comfort against my icy fingers, and sat down close beside me on the cold steps. The steam rose between us, a fragile, silent curtain of unspoken understanding. She said no, I finally murmured, my voice barely a whisper, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a familiar, gentle sympathy. "Because it's in the backyard," I managed, a small, bitter laugh escaping my lips, devoid of any real humor. "Because it's not the crystal ballroom at the Grand Hotel, no glittering chandeliers, no bespoke monogrammed napkins. No meticulously plated beef tenderloin with expertly chosen wine pairings. It doesn't align with the grandiose vision she's always held for the day her daughter finally got married. She imagined herself as the star of it," Leo said quietly after a thoughtful pause, and his words landed with the precise weight of truth. "It wasn't about me, my happiness, or my love for him. It never, ever was. My mom hadn't bothered to ask about the intricate lighting design I'd poured my heart and soul into for 6 long months. Meticulously crafting it from recycled glass bottles and hundreds of tiny, twinkling LED bulbs I'd wired carefully by hand in my sunroom studio. She hadn't inquired about the countless hours Leo and I had spent transforming our ordinary backyard into a magical, lantern-lit grove. How we'd painstakingly dug up and replanted the wildflower beds ourselves, nurturing them with hope. She hadn't asked why we were intentionally limiting our guest list to only 25 cherished friends and family members. Or what it truly meant to us, to Clara the graphic designer and Leo the musician. To exchange our sacred vows in the very place where we had built our life together, not in some impersonal, sterile venue rented by the hour. She had only asked once, weeks earlier, her voice laced with a characteristic scoff of disapproval, "You're not planning on doing it potluck style, are you, Clara?" That would be utterly dreadful. She hadn't even waited for my answer, already certain of its inadequacy. It's a peculiar thing, isn't it, the way some people can shrink something as profound and personal as a wedding down to its mere optics. Its superficial trappings? My mother, Eleanor, didn't seem to care in the slightest who I was marrying, or how deeply I loved Leo. She cared, with an almost obsessive intensity, what other people would say, what they'd wear. What kind of perfectly curated photographs would eventually appear on Viewfinder for all the world to scrutinize? She didn't genuinely want to be a part of my wedding day, to share in my joy. She wanted, quite simply, to be seen, to be admired, to be the subject of envious whispers. I had presented my ideas to her in our living room, my hands trembling slightly as I laid out my handmade sketchbook. It was filled with detailed drawings of my vision, the delicate, pressed flower invitations I'd designed. Sketches of the rustic decorations for the backyard, the forest hideaway theme, even ideas for the locally sourced, artisanal favors. Eleanor, perched regally on the sofa, her expensive leather handbag placed beside her like a shield, barely glanced at it. She flipped through a few pages with an air of utter disinterest before pushing the sketchbook back towards me. This childish nonsense? This is what you call a wedding, Clara, she'd said, her voice like ice. Are you actively trying to embarrass me? To ruin my reputation? Sophia's wedding was at the Crystal Ballroom, the finest hotel in the city. You clearly don't have the means or the taste for something like that. Then, with a deliberate, dismissive gesture, she'd pushed the antique lace ring pillow I'd lovingly crafted, a sample of my handiwork, to the edge of the coffee table, watching as it tumbled to the floor. The sight of it lying there, a small, discarded symbol of my efforts, made my eyes sting. I gave her an invitation anyway, a tangible olive branch. It was printed on thick, creamy cardstock, not just a casual email. It was embossed with a delicate floral design, subtly lavender-scented, and tied with a fine, pale silk thread, a testament to my skills as a graphic designer. No RSVP ever arrived. The morning it would have reached her, she sent me a single, curt text message. Looks like something a homeschooler cobbled together in their craft room. A bitter laugh almost escaped me then. She'd probably conveniently forgotten that I was homeschooled for 3 years, a decision made entirely at her insistence. What do you do when the very person who raised you, who is supposed to love and support you unconditionally, tells you, not with screams or curses, but with a chilling, quiet finality, that your life, your choices, your very essence, simply doesn't measure up? What do you do when your own mother decides that your most meaningful, most cherished day isn't even worth the minor inconvenience of an Uber ride across town? You grieve the relationship you wished you had. A deep, hollow ache settles in your chest. Then, you pick yourself up. You keep going. You hang those carefully wired lights with defiant determination. You press your simple, elegant dress with steady hands. You rewrite your vows, infusing them with even more love and personal meaning. And you make damn sure to record everything, every precious, authentic moment. The space I occupied in my mother's world, in Eleanor's carefully constructed reality, had always felt conditional, precarious. I was the second daughter, the quieter, more introspective one. The artistic soul who often wore her older sister Sophia's expensive hand-me-downs without complaint and never once dared to ask why the voluminous family photo albums had entire, glossy pages completely devoid of my image, as if I were an afterthought, a ghost in my own family history. At Sophia's wedding, the big one, the extravagant one, the one Mom still proudly brags about to anyone in her book club or anyone who'll listen at the Willow Creek Community Center, the one featured in Evergreen Style, a magazine, I wasn't a bridesmaid, a position I'd secretly yearned for. I wasn't even seated with the immediate family at the lavish reception in the Crystal Ballroom. No, I was stationed discreetly behind the towering, opulent floral archway, clutching a clipboard and a crackling walkie-talkie. My role reduced to ensuring the elaborate buffet didn't run out of miniature crab cakes and that the hired violinist didn't commence his performance a moment too early. I vividly remember the shoes I wore that day, cheap, uncomfortable flats purchased from a dusty clearance bin, which had gifted me with painful blisters by the time the first dance even began. I remember Sophia's dress, a confection of hand-beaded, imported silk that had cost more than my entire college tuition at Oregon State University. And the way Mom had fussed over adjusting its ridiculously long train just before the ceremony. Actual tears welling in her eyes, as if she were personally crowning royalty, not just sending her daughter down the aisle. "You'll get your turn, dear," she'd whispered dismissively when I tentatively tried to step into the bridal suite for a quick family photo, effectively shooing me away. My turn, as she'd vaguely promised, never truly came. What I received instead were an endless stream of tasks, of orders. "Clara, carry this. Clara, check on that. Clara, do try to be useful. Clara, please don't be in the way." The only photograph in which I even vaguely appear from that entire ostentatious wedding weekend is a blurry, indistinct side profile shot where I'm captured in the distant background, diligently wiping down the multi-tiered cake table. An anonymous figure in the periphery. Someone, a distant cousin perhaps, once tagged me in it on Viewfinder and, with casual cruelty, captioned it "The Help." I'd managed a weak laugh at the time. I didn't bother to correct them. By then, I'd long since learned my designated place in the family hierarchy. So, when I finally gathered the courage to tell Mom, months before the date, that I was planning something small, something intimate, something deeply personal, to be held outdoors in our own beloved backyard, with no formal bridal party, no stuffy, obligatory speeches, just heartfelt vows and the simple sharing of bread and wine with our closest loved ones, she simply blinked, her perfectly plucked eyebrows arching in disbelief. "Small," she repeated, as if I just confessed to planning something utterly scandalous, perhaps even illegal. She pursed her lips, a familiar expression of disapproval settling on her face. "Well, that's rather disappointing, Clara. Don't you want a wedding that people will actually remember? Something significant?" "Oh, I wanted something I would remember, something deeply etched in my heart forever. I wanted the people I genuinely loved and who loved me in return, the man I had chosen to spend my life with." His gentle music drifting under an open sky, plates of delicious, wholesome food passed lovingly from hand to hand, not cold, uninspired chicken breast delivered by anonymous servers wearing impersonal name tags. I didn't need glittering chandeliers imported from France. I didn't need a $10,000, seven-tiered cake that tasted more of sugar than celebration. But Mom's carefully composed face, her dismissive tone, told me everything I needed to know. In her eyes, I had already failed. My choices, my very vision for my own wedding, clearly embarrassed her profoundly. It was I, not just the wedding, not its modest scale, but I, Clara, her daughter, who was deemed too small, too insignificant. Sophia called a week later, her voice bright and artificially concerned. I had harbored a fleeting, foolish hope that perhaps she was genuinely reaching out, attempting to bridge the ever-widening silence, the growing chasm between us. Instead, she said, with a sigh that feigned sisterly worry, "Mom is terribly worried about you, Clara. She thinks you might be having some sort of, well, a breakdown. She says you're deliberately sabotaging your own wedding because you're secretly terrified of being the center of attention. That you can't handle the spotlight." I listened patiently, letting her recite the lines Mom had clearly fed her. When she finally paused for breath, I simply said, my voice carefully neutral, "Thank you for your concern, Sophia." Then I quietly hung up the phone. They didn't understand. They couldn't. They never had, not really. What I was doing, what Leo and I were creating, wasn't sabotage, it was an act of profound reclamation. This wedding, this sacred day, was not intended as a stage for my mother's social ambitions. It wasn't designed as a carefully orchestrated family PR moment to impress her acquaintances from the Willow Creek CC. It wasn't a grand parade for distant second cousins I hadn't laid eyes on since middle school. People who wouldn't know the first thing about the life Leo and I had built. It was mine. Ours. And I was absolutely, resolutely not going to plan it as if I were humbly asking for their permission, for their conditional approval. The morning of my wedding, the Oregon sky was a soft, pearlescent gray, but it wasn't a threatening, stormy kind of gray. It was the kind of gentle, diffused gray that made all the other colors in the world stand out with an almost preternatural sharpness and clarity. The kind of light that transforms every humble flower, every blade of grass, into a delicate, individual brushstroke in a master's painting. I stood barefoot on the cool, damp wood of our back porch, gazing out at the rows of mismatched vintage chairs we'd lovingly borrowed from kind neighbors and friends. Each one adorned with a unique scrap of hand-dyed silk ribbon, fluttering like tiny, joyful flags. The wind, a gentle caress, picked up slightly, tugging playfully at the strings of paper lanterns we'd meticulously strung between the old oak and maple trees, transforming our yard into a whimsical, glowing canopy. They danced in the quiet morning air, a silent, graceful ballet. Inside, the warm, comforting aroma of brewing coffee and something sweet baking filled the air. Olivia, my dearest friend since high school, who had flown all the way from New York to be by my side, was carefully steaming my dress, a soft, cream-colored linen gown, elegantly simple, with practical, hidden pockets. She'd sewn it herself, every single stitch a tiny, tangible act of love and unwavering support. Leo's cousin, a whirlwind of cheerful efficiency, was meticulously setting out the place cards on the long, rustic wooden table we'd painstakingly sanded and stained ourselves. No elaborate calligraphy, no ostentatious gold embossing. Just names, simply and beautifully printed on wildflower-seeded paper. So each cherished guest could take theirs home and plant a small piece of our day, watching something beautiful grow from it. I walked through the transformed space slowly, reverently, my bare feet cool on the dew-kissed grass, touching each lovingly arranged chair. Each repurposed glass jar filled with fragrant herbs and vibrant field flowers we'd gathered from the local farmer's market. These weren't mere placeholders, indifferent objects. These were conscious decisions, heartfelt intentions. Every single tiny detail had a profound reason behind it, and every single reason was, quite simply, love. No opulent bridal suite for me, no bustling team of unfamiliar makeup artists and hairstylists. Just my own familiar bathroom mirror, reflecting back a woman I was finally beginning to recognize and embrace. In my hands, with a sense of calm I hadn't anticipated, I twisted my hair up into a loose, artful knot, tucking two fragrant, creamy white gardenias, freshly picked from our bush, just behind my ear. When I finally stepped into the dress, the soft linen felt like a gentle, protective armor, not to defend myself against external judgment, but to hold myself together, to contain the overwhelming emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. Olivia caught my eye in the reflection, her own eyes soft with affection. "You okay, Clara?" she asked, her voice a gentle anchor. I nodded, a small, genuine smile finally gracing my lips. "I think so. Yes, I really think so." She came to stand behind me, her comforting presence a balm, and carefully adjusted a slightly loose strap on my shoulder. You look like yourself, Clara. Truly, wonderfully yourself." And in that moment, standing there in my self-made sanctuary, I had never felt more completely, authentically, and joyfully like myself. At precisely 4:12 p.m., as the afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long, dancing shadows across the lawn, our ceremony began. There was no grand, formal prelude, no pomp and circumstance. Just the natural symphony of birdsong from the surrounding trees, the gentle sigh of the wind rustling through the leaves, and the soft, welcoming creak of the old garden gate as our beloved guests entered quietly, respectfully, as if they were stepping into a sacred memory being woven into existence in real time. Leo stood at the end of the aisle, which was simply the familiar garden path we walked every day, now strewn with fragrant lavender and rose petals. He wore a beautifully tailored navy suit that highlighted his kind eyes, and a slightly crooked, endearingly nervous smile that made my heart ache with love. His hands, I noticed, trembled slightly as he watched me approach. Mine did too, a matching tremor of joy and anticipation. We didn't have a traditional officiant reciting rote phrases. We didn't read from a pre-written, impersonal script. We spoke directly to each other, our voices sometimes thick with emotion, not to an audience, but to the soul of the person standing before us. I don't recall the exact words we exchanged in that sacred moment, the promises we whispered, but I remember with vivid clarity what it felt like. It felt like standing perfectly still, truly present, for the very first time in years. Like being wholly seen and deeply heard by someone who wasn't simply waiting for their turn to speak, but who was listening with their entire being. After we kissed, a kiss that sealed our promises and our future, everyone clapped, not with polite, restrained applause, but with a spontaneous, wholehearted, joyous roar of celebration. My absolute favorite sound in the entire world. Dinner was served from giant, colorful enamel pots, family style, just as we'd envisioned. No stern-faced servers in stiff uniforms, no formal, plated service. Just overflowing bowls of delicious, home-style food, fragrant stews, vibrant salads, and crusty, artisanal bread, passed lovingly down the long wooden table, accompanied by peals of laughter echoing off the ivy-covered fence. Someone started humming softly along to a nostalgic Van Morrison song drifting from a borrowed Bluetooth speaker tucked amongst the flowers. The melody weaving through the happy chatter. When night finally fell, blanketing our little world in a soft, velvety darkness, the lights came on. All those countless hours of meticulous wiring and careful, artistic placement had paid off. The entire yard glowed with a warm, magical incandescence, as if 1,000 captured fireflies had taken up joyful residence in the branches of each and every tree. Olivia leaned over at one point, her eyes wide with wonder, and whispered in my ear, "Clara, this looks like something out of a dream. Like a beautiful film set." But it didn't, not really. It looked, and felt, like home. Our home, imbued with our love. And I knew, even as I laughed and drank sweet elderflower wine and danced barefoot on the cool flagstones under those enchanting lights, that the people who were conspicuously missing, the ones whose absence was a palpable ache, wouldn't ever truly see this. Not in real time, not in its vibrant, living color, not in its authentic, heartfelt context. They wouldn't see the way Leo's eyes crinkled at the corners when he looked at me during our first, slightly clumsy dance. A look so full of adoration it made my breath catch. They wouldn't hear the deeply personal, often humorous, and sometimes tearful toasts offered by people who genuinely knew us, who had witnessed our journey together. They wouldn't taste the tangy lavender lemonade, or the rich, decadent fig and almond cake made by Leo's aunt, or smell the fragrant rosemary smoke drifting from the grill where Leo was expertly charring vegetables. They'd just see pictures, perhaps. Static images, devoid of the warmth, the sounds, the smells, the feeling. And by then, of course, it would be far, far too late. We hadn't initially planned to post anything online, not right away, at least. Our wedding felt too sacred, too personal for immediate public consumption. Our dear friend Marcus, a wonderfully talented independent filmmaker based in Portland, Oregon, not a conventional wedding videographer by any stretch, had generously offered to document the day as his wedding gift to us. He shot it like a beautifully preserved memory, a visual poem. There were no wide, sweeping drone shots of the venue, no cheesy slow-motion veil tosses, just us, authentically, as we were. Leo and I setting tables side by side earlier that day, Olivia helping me fix my hair. Our hands clasped tightly together under the gentle glow of the string lights during the ceremony. 2 weeks after the wedding, an eternity it felt like, he sent over a short film, a mere 90 seconds long. It had no narration, no distracting captions, just the soft, slow, evocative strains of the Paper Kites Bloom playing as a soundtrack. The film began with a close-up of Leo nervously wiping his damp palms on his trousers just before the ceremony. Then it cut seamlessly to a shot of me, a serene smile on my face, carefully tying a silk ribbon around a simple jar of wildflowers. The final, lingering shot was of Leo and me, dancing barefoot and carefree on the old flagstones, with the whimsical paper lanterns swaying gently above us like a constellation of stars pretending to be close enough to touch. It made me cry, hot, happy tears streaming down my face. I watched it 3 times in a row, alone in the quiet stillness of our living room, before finally calling Leo in to share it. He didn't speak a word while it played, his eyes fixed on the screen. When it ended, he took a long, slow breath and said, his voice filled with awe, "Marcus, he made it feel like something ancient, something timeless." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. He truly captured it, didn't he? Do you think it's terribly petty of me if I post it on Viewfinder? I asked, a little hesitantly. Leo smiled then, a gentle, understanding smile that wasn't unkind in the slightest. Sometimes, Clara, petty is just the unvarnished truth finally being told, finally seeing the light of day. So, I posted it, quietly, without any fanfare. No trendy hashtags, no lengthy, explanatory captions beyond the simple, heartfelt words, October 8th, home. Love. And then I put my phone down, turned off the ringer, and went to bed, a sense of quiet peace settling over me. By the next morning, the views on Viewfinder had inexplicably passed 20,000. By noon, it had astonishingly crossed the 50,000 mark. By dinner time, a writer from Artisan Living, a niche but influential indie design blog I secretly admired, had sent me a direct message. "Excuse me, is this your wedding? The short film is simply breathtaking. We'd be absolutely honored if we could feature it in our next issue." It's exactly the kind of authentic, soulful celebration our readers adore. I blinked at the message on my screen, then reread it slowly, twice, to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I truly hadn't expected that kind of response, not in a million years. By the end of that whirlwind week, our little backyard wedding was featured not only in Artisan Living, but also in A Modern Homestead Quarterly and Evergreen Style, and was even included in a viral Roundup article sensationally titled, "The Most Soulful and Beautiful Backyard Wedding You've Ever Seen and Why It Matters." I didn't feel vindicated, not exactly, not in a gloating, "I told you so" kind of way. But I did feel seen, truly seen, in a way I hadn't anticipated being seen, not by a throng of anonymous strangers online, but by people who hadn't meticulously rehearsed a more palatable, more conventional version of me they might have liked better. They saw me. And then, inevitably, the calls started. Sophia was first, of course. She left a slightly breathless voicemail that began with an astonished, "Wow, Clara," and ended with a rather accusatory, "So why on earth didn't you tell us it was going to look like that? It's all over Viewfinder. People are saying it's more stylish than mine was at the Crystal Ballroom, can you believe it?" The jealousy was palpable. Then came a text from my Aunt Carol, Mom's more laid-back sister, "Clara, honey, that wedding video of yours is absolutely everywhere on my Viewfinder feed. All my friends are sharing it. I didn't even realize it was yours at first. It's simply gorgeous. Your mother must be so proud." Then finally, my mother, Eleanor. No call, naturally. Just a series of terse, angry text messages, followed by several increasingly agitated voice messages. The first text was a single, chilling line, "Is this the wedding I was so pointedly uninvited to?" I stared at the screen for a long, heavy moment, the injustice of her words like a fresh slap in the face. Technically, she had been invited. She had simply never bothered to acknowledge the invitation, let alone RSVP. The next morning, she followed up with another barrage, "You've made us look absolutely terrible, Clara. Utterly foolish. People from the Willow Creek CC keep asking Sophia and me why we weren't there at your charming little wedding. You could have at least warned us this was going to become some sort of public spectacle. How dare you embarrass your family like this?" Warned them? Warn them about what? My happiness? I read her furious messages again, and then again, a knot of familiar frustration tightening in my chest. I wasn't entirely sure what part she found most upsetting, the undeniable fact that the wedding had happened, beautifully and joyfully, without her esteemed presence, or the inconvenient fact that it was now being lauded as something uniquely beautiful and authentic. This wasn't about her supposedly hurt feelings, I realized with a sudden, stark clarity. This was about her precious public image, her carefully constructed facade. It had always been about image. I didn't respond to her texts or her increasingly frantic voice messages right away. I needed time to process. I wasn't sure what, if anything, there was to say to someone who was clearly more upset about being conspicuously absent from the popular Viewfinder photos than about missing the actual, deeply personal moment of her daughter's marriage. But I did respond, 3 long days later, after Leo and I had watched Marcus's poignant short film again. This time with me curled up beside him on the sofa, a glass of calming red wine in my hand, and a long, contemplative silence had fallen after it ended. "You should let her see the full version, Clara," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm. "Not because she necessarily deserves it after everything, but because she clearly, profoundly, doesn't understand what she truly missed. What she so readily dismissed." So, I took a deep breath and sent a carefully worded message to Eleanor, "If you genuinely want to understand what really happened that day, what you chose not to be a part of, come to my sunroom studio on Friday at 3 p.m. You can watch the full, unedited footage from the wedding. Marcus documented everything. No edits, no omissions. She wrote back a curt 2 hours later, fine. I will be there. She arrived at my home, to my sunroom studio, 10 minutes late, of course. She wore pearls, naturally, and a Chanel jacket that probably cost more than our entire wedding budget. She walked into the little sun-drenched studio, my creative sanctuary. With the air of someone touring a minor charity establishment she might deign to donate a small sum to if it met her exacting standards. Polite, cool, impeccably detached. I didn't offer her any superficial small talk. I didn't offer a hug, nor did I expect one. Marcus had kindly set up the screening for us. Just 2 comfortable chairs, a large, high-resolution monitor, and a heavy, anticipatory silence. I dimmed the lights with a remote. I pressed play. For the first 5 minutes of the 30-minute film, Eleanor sat ramrod straight, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her expression unreadable. I watched her furtively out of the corner of my eye, bracing myself for the inevitable scoff, the derisive snort. The condescending chuckle I knew so well. It never came. There was no narrator in Marcus's documentary, no sentimental music overlaying the raw emotion, just the real, unfiltered sounds of the day. Footsteps crunching on the gravel path, the cheerful clinking of glasses, someone laughing warmly from the back row during the vows. My own voice, trembling slightly but clear, as I read the vows I'd poured my heart into. Leo, my strong, steady Leo, stumbling a little over his own heartfelt words, his voice thick with emotion. The unmistakable catch in his throat when he looked directly at me and said, with a raw honesty that still made my heart ache, Clara. You make me feel like I've finally come home. At around the 12-minute mark, I saw her shift uncomfortably in her chair. At minute 18, during Olivia's moving and deeply personal speech about my journey and our friendship, she blinked hard. Several times in quick succession. At minute 20, when the screen filled with the joyful, uninhibited image of Leo and me dancing under the canopy of glowing paper lanterns. Those warm planets suspended in the twilight sky, she exhaled slowly, a long, shaky breath. As if she'd been unknowingly holding it in for the entire duration. One particular shot lingered, a brief, poignant moment where I, as the bride, glanced towards the empty antique chair we had reserved for her. My expression a fleeting mixture of hope and sorrow. When the footage finally ended, I paused the screen on a still image of the now empty backyard, the mismatched chairs slightly askew. The flickering candle stubs in their glass jars, a sense of beautiful, peaceful aftermath. She didn't speak for a very long time. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then, finally, her voice barely a whisper, it actually looked quite expensive, Clara. The lighting, the flowers, very well done. I waited, my own expression carefully neutral. She cleared her throat, a small, nervous sound. And you didn't mention it would be like that. So artistic. I turned to face her fully then, my voice steady, devoid of accusation, but firm with a newfound strength I hadn't known I possessed. Would it have truly mattered if I had, Mom? Would any description have changed your mind? She opened her mouth as if to protest, then closed it again, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. I invited you, I stated simply, the truth of it hanging in the air between us. You chose not to come. You declined. But you didn't make it clear that she began, her voice rising defensively. I cut her off, gently but decisively. I wasn't auditioning for your approval, Mom. I wasn't seeking your permission or your validation. I was getting married. To the man I love. In a way that felt true to us. She looked away then, out the window of the sunroom studio towards the very backyard she had spurned, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. I didn't fill the silence this time. I let it be. When she finally met my gaze again, her voice was sharper, the familiar defensive tone returning. Though a new note of something akin to regret threaded through it. You made us look like we didn't care, Clara. Like we abandoned you. I tilted my head slightly, holding her gaze. Did you care, Mom? Did you truly care about my happiness, or were you only concerned with appearances? She flinched, a small, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of her mouth, a fleeting shadow of pain. But she didn't answer. She couldn't. I stood up then, a sense of weary resolution settling over me, and walked to the studio door, opening it. "Thank you for coming, Mom. For watching." She lingered for a moment, half standing, then seemed to deflate, sitting back down heavily, just for a second. As if the weight of unspoken things was too much to bear. I didn't know it would be so beautiful," she said at last, her voice small, almost childlike. "That's precisely the point, isn't it?" I replied quietly, a profound sadness, but not anger, washing over me. "You didn't care enough to find out." She didn't hug me as she left the sunroom studio. Her expensive heels clicked softly on the wooden floor. I didn't expect her to. Our relationship wasn't built on such easy displays of affection. But as the door clicked shut behind her, I felt something profound shift within me. Not closure, not exactly healing, not yet. Just a quiet, unshakable clarity. A knowing. I didn't hear from her directly for a while after that day. No follow-up phone call, no long, rambling text messages filled with justifications, no awkward, backpedaling attempts wrapped in flimsy, half-hearted apologies. Just silence. Which, strangely enough, felt more honest, more real, than almost anything else we had exchanged in years. I didn't go to Thanksgiving at Sophia's grand house in Lake Oswego that year. No invitation was extended. I wasn't invited for Christmas at Eleanor's either. No one explicitly said I was cut off, disowned, but no one reached out either. It was a quiet, unspoken exile, the kind that begins as a subtle, uncomfortable distance and gradually, insidiously, settles into a near-complete erasure. And I was fine. Surprisingly so. Not in that triumphant, fist-pumping, Hollywood movie ending kind of way. But in a slow, steady, grounded kind of way. In the quiet, dawning way you finally realize, deep in your bones, that you don't have to keep frantically, desperately chasing a door that was never, ever going to truly open for you. Instead, I poured myself into my graphic design work, into my freelance projects which were suddenly, wonderfully, in demand. I poured myself into Leo, into our shared love of music and quiet nights, into the beautiful, ordinary life we were building together in our little house with the magical backyard. The wedding film, the full 30-minute version that Marcus had so artfully created, was picked up by the Hawthorne Collective, an edgy arts collective in Portland, Oregon. They screened it as part of a gallery show they curated, aptly titled Hearth and Craft, Narratives of Home. Leo and I flew up to Portland for the opening night. It was surreal. People in the audience, strangers, actually cried while watching our wedding. A young couple, artists themselves, approached us afterwards, their eyes shining, and asked if we were actors. If the whole thing had been a performance piece. I smiled and told them, no, not actors. Just a woman, a graphic designer, who got married in her own backyard because that was where her life, her true, authentic life, had finally, truly begun. 6 long months passed, a season of quiet growth and gentle healing. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I came home from a meeting to find a small, unassuming package resting on our porch. There was no return address, just my name, Clara, written in careful, familiar cursive I recognized instantly. A script that sent a small jolt through me. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was not a photograph, but a small, linen handkerchief. It was hand-stitched, somewhat clumsily, with a slightly lopsided, imperfectly embroidered heart in a muted blue thread. Tucked beside it was a simple, elegant card. On it, in that same unmistakable handwriting, were just a few, carefully chosen words, "Your Sakahin, work of art/creation was, truly, very beautiful, Clara. I am sorry." No other explanation, no signature, but I didn't need one. I didn't frame the handkerchief. I didn't pick up the phone to offer stilted, awkward words of thanks. I just held it in my hand for a long time, feeling the slightly uneven stitches beneath my fingertips, a tangible symbol of a small, hesitant step. Then, I carefully slid it into the back of our wedding album, the one filled with Marcus's beautiful photos. Right behind a picture of Leo spinning me joyfully under the warm glow of the paper lanterns. Both of us laughing, barefoot and carefree, lit from beneath by the magical glow of 100 tiny, hand-wired bulbs. That's the story I'll tell, the one I'll cherish. If anyone ever asks about our wedding, I'll tell them we did it entirely our way, authentically and unapologetically. I'll tell them we planted wildflowers where some people might have expected perfectly cultivated roses. That we fed our cherished guests from our hearts and our hands, not from a caterer's impersonal, pre-approved checklist. That we danced on uneven gravel under paper moons and laughed until our sides ached. And I'll tell them that we invited everyone who truly mattered to us, even the ones who, for their own reasons, chose not to show up. Because in the end, a wedding, a life, isn't truly made by who merely attends, by who fills a seat. It's made by who stays, by who chooses to be present, by who loves you through it all. And when I look at the photographs now, at the moving images Marcus captured, I don't see what's missing, I don't focus on the empty spaces. I see, with a heart full of gratitude and a quiet, steady joy, everything that beautifully, wonderfully, remained.